Today, Roel and I talk about a problem we are seeing across the board. We are starting to call it the Great Pipeline Starvation and how AI has so far failed to fulfill the promise of infinite and cheap growth. We're also talking about what the downstream effects of that are and what we believe the only solution for 95% of companies out there looks like. And now, enjoy.
The basic physics of this is leads go where attention goes. Right now, so much of the market is just being captured by a single cloud of topics. If you have any other company right now, there's just less attention for you to grab in the market right now.
There's a reason why all of those N8N flows on LinkedIn replacing STRs, all of these posts blow up. How can I cheaply get more revenue, right? They want to know that.
It is still a time to do lead gen. It's just that some people are learning how to adjust to this and some people are not. And I don't think this trend will go away. And this is why you have to deal with it right now.
The headline here is people will start spending overall the same. Or if you're super crazy in spend a little bit less. And you will be like, oh, wow, wait a minute. Actually, in these parts, in those roles, I can live with a lot fewer headcount. And I can take those savings and try and put them to where we think the bottleneck is, which largely speaking is pipeline.
So something funny happens typically when Tony and me talk and discuss what we see out there, which is that sometimes we see completely different things. And we also focus on different things at different times, on different stages and all that stuff. But then sometimes we're basically speaking about the exact same thing to different people in different regions. And I think that's always an important and interesting topic at the time. So if the same thing is happening in Copenhagen and Berlin and London through different stages, then I think that's always an interesting topic. And there is one of these there right now. What is it that you're seeing out there right now, Tony, that I've also been seeing?
Yeah, I don't think it's a shocker for anyone. I think everyone is feeling it themselves. And I think it's screwing with a lot of companies and screwing with a lot of careers, actually. And I started to call it the Great Pipeline Starvation. So everyone is pipeline starved. Everyone is trying their best to kind of change that. Everyone is especially kind of trying to automate outbound, doing these AI SDR plays, trying to kind of figure this out. That in itself has just gotten so much harder. So some of those tactics, I feel, are just too saturated now. And what you used to do 2-3 years ago just doesn't work the same thing anymore. I think another big one is basically the whole impact of AI and AI search on how people work with SEO, for example. You know, we talked with someone else on the show previously, but I think, was it last week or something like this? The, Monday.com, fairly large project management, task management, now even has a CRM and all of that stuff. I think their public valuation dropped 40%. 40% in one day. Why? On an earnings call, they said that their organic traffic collapsed. Simply because Google changed some things around. People are using AI more to search things. And, some of these very, very top funnel things that have built up, kind of that search equity evaporated. Do you have an opinion on this 40% drop, actually, Roel, before we go further?
So I'm not a financial analyst, what that means for valuation, basically for the stock market, that is a little bit of a different question. I think the underlying mechanic is more interesting there. I'm a bit surprised, actually, that this is what happens to the big players, because part of the mechanics that I'm seeing is that the startups, the early stage players, the not so big names yet, are being kind of priced out of the lead gen or top of the funnel market. And Monday.com has already been basically an established player, or at least more established than most people out there. Yeah. So it's a bit funny, or at least peculiar, that this is what happens to this kind of player right now. I do think, though, that these are the two trends that I'm seeing. So one is that smaller players are being priced out just by the fact that the brand doesn't generate the leads that they would, and the difference is just so much bigger. Yeah. Funnily enough, if you do work at the Salesforce or HubSpot at Monday.com, you're probably disagree for sure, because you also feel the second effect, which is everyone just has it harder right now in lead gen.
Yeah.
And so from your point of view, things are also screwed right now. And you're probably like, wait, you're telling me we have it easier than the smaller ones? Well, no, I'm just saying that you're both affected by the same problem right now. Lead gen is difficult, and the smaller ones are affected even harder. And you're profiting from some brand equity right now.
I think there's a third thing going on, actually. It's a few breakout companies are seemingly sucking all the oxygen, the attention oxygen out of the room, right? There's, everyone talking about Lovable, everyone is talking about, some of those breakout companies, and they seem to dominate what everyone is talking about, right? It's really difficult to try and step into this and take a share of that. If you're just an average normal company with a average normal, doesn't even need to be boring, but boring story, right? And just kind of circle back on the Monday.com thing. I think this is, to a degree, obviously what people are thinking about. Like, I don't have a clue about the 30-40% drop either, by the way. I think you're right about this, but the logic is pretty clear, right? Like, well, you've just lost a major asset that was producing revenue for you for free. Now you have two options. You can either spend more in the more expensive channels to make up that gap, or you don't do that because maybe you can't afford it, and you just grow less, right? And both of these outcomes are kind of terrible. Like, I'm not sure what level of terrible. Is it 40% terrible? I don't know. But I think that's what's behind that, right? People are basically seeing here like, okay, so that will have a downstream impact on either your profitability or your growth. We don't like either of those scenarios, so therefore you're gonna get punished, basically.
Really happy that you introduced the third lever as well, which is kind of the basic physics of this. Is leads go where attention goes, especially when it comes to online lead gen or any other kind of non-outbound calling or non-outbound human-generated lead generation. Right now, so much of the market is just being captured by a single cloud of topics or a single cloud of excitement, which basically has to do with AI and go-to-market and all these different variations. And if you have any other company right now, there's just less attention for you to grab in the market right now. And this, to foreshadow this already, is one of the major reasons that players and people are already turning their away as much as possible from I would say, relying on grabbing that attention. Also because that attention is becoming more and more expensive, right? So the scarcer it is, yes, you can still get it, but that's going to cost you top dollar. And turning to taking matters into their own hands. We're going to get into that in a second, but this is really, to some extent, people are not thinking about this like systemically or like how does this work right now, but it's just the intuition for people. When they realize, hey, there's no attention for my topic, I have to create it. And I think this is the time right now to create that attention more and more when you're not the hot, lovable AI startup.
But I really think that taps into how, okay, everyone is pipeline staffed. Because of things just starting to change. And more people are feeling it. So how's everyone reacting to it, right? And at least from what I'm seeing is, people are scrambling more and more to try and generate that attention, trying to spend more dollars to generate more pipeline, to do more top funnel work, basically, right? There's a reason why all of those N8N flows on LinkedIn replacing SDRs, all of these posts blow up. It's like everyone is interested in how can I cheaply get more revenue, right? They want to know that. I'm seeing more and more teams adding kind of events setups and trying to see people face to face. Well, I think that's great. I think it's the right thing. I think this can be, very, CAC efficient, but it probably is a little bit more expensive than whatever you did before, right? And equally so, I think as some of those channels collapse or just get less efficient. We talked about outbound being less efficient than it used to be. We talked about SEO not working anymore. They're basically pouring more money now into ads and other top funnel campaigns in order to try and attract the same amount of attention that they need in order to feed their funnel. I think, and this is true for every company from my perspective, is the whole setup that you have, the number of AEs, SDRs to a degree, CSNs, the whole shebang It's really just a function of how much pipeline you get and needs to be worked through, right? All of these people really just really important, but their job is to create throughput through the funnel, right? If you have fewer things coming into the factory, you will simply need fewer hands to put them together and assemble a customer. That's just what it is, right? So really all of those jobs are depending on how much pipeline you get. So what a lot of people have been doing now then is, if we were to reduce the team, that would be a sign of weakness. We are not growing in the right direction. So we need to spend more on the top end of the funnel in order to keep growing and keep, feeding the machine basically. The problem that is coming from that though, and I think this problem is starting to show up in more and more dashboards, is that it's just too expensive. It's simply too expensive. If you previously spent $1 million on your top funnel, and now I need to spend $2 million on a top funnel to get the same results, it's still only the same results, meaning your revenue didn't go up to pay for that additional spend. Probably your revenue is flat or decreasing, depending on the scenario, right? So, and ultimately, the CFO will come knocking and say like, hey, friends, this just doesn't work anymore, right? And I think there was some really interesting research from, Benchside and Winning by Design, and maybe Bart can pull in the graphic here, basically showing the public SaaS businesses and how much money they're spending to acquire one additional dollar of revenue. And it's stunning. It's really stunning. There are a handful out of those, I think 70-ish companies. There's a handful that spends $1 to acquire a dollar. The vast majority is they at least spend $2. Some of them spend $8 to acquire one single additional dollar in revenue. I don't think you need to be a CFO or have like an accounting degree to be like, wait a minute, guys, I don't think this works out. I don't think you need to be a genius for that thing, right? So, and I think people are more and more looking, staring down the barrel with this conundrum of like, okay, I can choose to grow a lot less or overspend. What should I be doing here, right? And I think that's the problem out there right now.
So while this might seem like doomsday, right? And basically there is no leads to be generated anymore unless you are doing something with AI, which, by the way, to that point, and to also add fuel to the fire, I think this will make some people who are not doing an AI startup thing quite furious. But here's the reality of things. I have seen calendars physically stood next to founders of something related to AI startups. And I have seen their schedules. And this already has started 3 years ago, but also as recently as 2 weeks ago. And it is wild how little they have to do to get all the attention. And it can also feel unfair, but it's kind of their reality right now that Hassan from 11X had a whole calendar booked out 2 days after launching Alice. That was about 2 years ago, from 8 in the morning to 8 in the evening in 15-minute slots inbound, basically, with almost no ad spend and with almost no any visible kind of marketing or anything like that. That is wild. And same example 2 weeks ago, a founder who basically has to turn off notifications for inbound leads during a meeting we had because there was so many and he couldn't show me the stuff he wanted to show me. And that is just the reality of things. It's cool to be on that side. It's not so cool to be on your side. But it is still a time to do lead gen. It's just that some people are learning how to adjust to this and some people are not. And I don't think this trend will go away. And this is why you have to deal with it right now and get started on this journey right now of finding your own ways. Now, again, if you're an AI startup, you're golden. You basically have to do nothing and you'll be fine in commercially. Now, you have to do some things, but the barriers are very low. And if you're not, then you have to do a ton of things by now to still have a company that has a chance to become profitable or kind of at least exitable at some point.
So first of all, I don't think all the AI teams are having none of the problems. I think that's probably not true. But certainly some of those teams hit message market fit really quickly and then just get a lot of attention, right? And I think this works out. And sometimes there's also just a spike and then flattens off, right? But in some cases, this can continue for a really long time. But for everyone else out there that runs a real business, that has real product market fit, that has real employees, and it's like 10, 20, 30 million in size, like, yeah, you're right. It obviously sounds grim, but what do we think here is the potential way out, right? Because we don't want to just sit here and say like, yeah, that kind of looks shit. But what we want to do is we want to plot a little bit of a course where people need to maybe start thinking about how to execute against that. Whether they even do want to execute against that. Because what I've seen so far, and what's starting to become more clear to me is, we're starting at the pipeline starvation level. Like, that's the problem. I think everyone has that. One of the solutions to the pipeline starvation was basically to say, okay, AI is going to help us grow. It's going to accelerate everything. It's going to make things so much easier. We have less friction. We can just flip on this agent from Hassan and the inbounds will rein in. We can just turn around this clay table and we know exactly whom to call and everyone will buy, right? But that actually hasn't happened like that. It simply hasn't. This AI SDR thing hasn't worked out, at least not as a growth lever. And we're going to get to that in a second again, right? And so to a degree, while every single board on this planet is currently talking to the CEO and saying, hey, my friend, you need to use AI for the business. You have to be on the forefront of that. The CEO then goes off and has a conversation with the CRO and tells her or him the same thing. And obviously the CRO thinks about, well, let's use AI to grow, right? And I would say that has failed. Now, the CEO also talked to the other friends on the exec team, and one of them is the CFO. And to the CFO, the CEO said, well, use AI to cut costs, right? Because that's kind of the division of labor here between those two C-levels. And I think what's probably going to happen now, and I don't think it's a popular topic still because it's a negative message. It doesn't fit into what all those companies want to kind of tell you. But I think what's going to happen now is that the growth AI play has not worked out yet, despite a bunch of investments and 2 years trying and better models and everything. And I think the CFO will simply step in and be like, okay, so we can't get more revenue with this technology. I think what we can get with that technology is we can use it to replace headcount. And do that potentially more aggressively than we've been trying before. And actually using AI to reduce costs on some of those roles in order to frankly pay for all of the top funnel stuff that we need to do in order to get even enough in order to grow, hit our targets, yada, yada, right? So I think, and we'll dig a little bit deeper into this, but the headline here is, if you look at the funnel, if you look at the bow tie, if you look at, however you envision your revenue engine, I think what is probably going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months, very aggressively across the board, is people will start spending overall the same. Or if you're super crazy in spend a little bit less, right? You don't want to spend $8 to acquire one. That's not a good idea. But what they're going to do is, I think they're going to start shifting simply the cash around. Like you will look at your funnel and you will be like, oh, wow, wait a minute. Actually, in these parts, in those roles, I can live with a lot fewer headcount, and I can take those savings and try and put them to where we think the bottleneck is, which largely speaking is pipeline, right? So there will be a redistribution of where in the funnel the majority of the money is being invested, and my bet is it's going to be the top end of the funnel.
Before we get back to the conversation, a quick break. Most teams I talk to that are trying to scale, strategy is not the issue. It's almost always execution. They've got all the dashboards telling them what happened, but nothing that actually drives what to do next. That's why I've been watching closely what ZoomInfo is up to lately. They've completely rebuilt themselves. It's not just contact data anymore. It's a full go-to-market intelligence platform that sees buyer signals and launches the motion automatically. Strategy turns into action, finally, and growth becomes predictable. Check it out at zoominfo.com/revenue-formula.
Let's kind of maybe look at this from another perspective. Let's not look at salespeople and CSFOs. Let's look at simply manufacturing over the last 40 years. Going from a heavily labor-dependent perspective of people need to put things together to assembly lines where people basically shut off the light now. They simply shut off the light because there's no human being there. All of this is done by robot arms and these things just assembling everything, right? I would say that was a pretty good improvement efficiency-wise for the world. That probably helped a lot, or maybe a little bit, right? What I think is peculiar with that specific example, by the way, is it's not like those companies suddenly started creating a bunch more profits. Isn't this peculiar? It's like, suddenly we don't need to pay all of those salaries anymore. We actually can do this with robots, and sure, that's also expensive and CapEx, you need to install this stuff and so forth, right? But actually what happens is a little bit what I kind of said previously. Basically, the funds were just reallocated, meaning people stopped spending on salaries, and I had those robots in place. So what are they doing instead? In manufacturing, you usually have some pricing pressure. Maybe you get basically less revenue per item, but therefore more revenue because you sell it more, right? Kind of there might be that thing that they basically did. But in other cases, what they started doing is investing even more in R&D for automation. Basically investing a lot of money into additional future gains, right? And if I were to translate that to the SaaS and software world, the way I actually see it is, let's just say, and we're going to talk about in a second how you can actually reduce your cost across the funnel, right? But basically, once you've done that, I think you basically have two main options that are sitting in front of you. You can either take the money and throw it into short-term pipe gen, try and figure this SDR thing out, try and send more money to Google, try and do more events, try and do all of that stuff. And I think the vast majority of people will do that. I think there's a whole other problem going on with go-to-market, which is short-termism, but we're not going to talk about that now. The other part of that money, I actually think it might end up going outside of go-to-market and go towards product development. And the idea is there to take that money to generate long-term value pipeline, right? Kind of, hey, we want to add another product, we want to add another feature in order to win those deals, or less churn and so forth. And we're investing that money in that part of the organization instead of blasting our pipe check. But both of these things are kind of pipeline related. One is short term, one is long term. Actually, if we're doing this in the right way, at least that's my conviction. That is my conviction. We can use AI to try and automate a bunch of things in our sales and marketing and CS, reduce the headcount there. That is really unfortunate news for a bunch of people. I totally get that, but I think that will be part of the reality. That discussion is kind of playing out on LinkedIn right now. But in manufacturing, it didn't play out anyway. It played out in a boardroom, and then the decision was made and it's done. And I think the same thing will happen here too, by the way, whatever happens on social media in this regard, right? And I think if you overcome some of the challenges, of which there are plenty, right? Again, think about it like this, kind of a company that was doing manufacturing 40 years ago, all kinds of people, everyone is kind of following process, but not really. You couldn't install today's robot arm hardware there because, well, the process just wasn't defined well enough. And, this whole thing wasn't put together well enough. And these things weren't thought through. And when I kind of read up on some of the things that were obstacles back then, and then I'm hearing like, we can't automate because, sorry, our Salesforce data is just too shit. It just doesn't work. Or well, all of these SDRs doing their own process can't automate that. It's because we don't have one process. So therefore, sorry, can't do it. I think what's going to happen, my friends, is your bosses or your boss's bosses are eventually just going to call bullshit on all that stuff and say like, well, my friend, I think then it's time for you to either leave the company or to sit down and fix this now. Because I think that's really what's actually going to happen, right? And that was my counter rant to yours, Raoul. But I think everyone can decide right now on which side they are. Like, hey, is it either it's not going to work out, or I don't think we have another choice. And my thinking is, I don't think you have another choice.
Funnily enough, this time unplanned, we both are saying the same thing, because I'm not saying that's an argument for AI doesn't work or Tinder doesn't work and all that stuff. It does work for the top 5% of people, the top 10% of people, right? The top 5% of people on that was a crazy statistic. That was insane. Someone sent me that thing. Like top 5% on Tinder are having basically 90% of the attention, dating, whatever. The top 5% of people on social media get all the likes and all the comments and all the views and all the attention. The top percentage of people on whatever kind of lead platform or lead gen you're thinking of are getting most of the attention, kind of like equity there right now. And what basically happens is it's kind of like these revolutions are kind of like, and obviously none of them were as big as AI might be, are kind of like a catalyst for, you might call it like natural selection, right? Kind of like the strongest will survive. And when they do survive, they're going to get outsized gains, and the others are kind of like screwed. And that's what I meant with the rant earlier, is like big parts of society are basically screwed because of that thing. But then the top people will be, because of that thing, more fitter, faster, stronger, make more money than ever before. And they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm making so much money because of AI right now. The message to me is like, AI is not just going to magically make you more money. Like, if you're among the top 5 to 10% of people and companies, it might do that. Otherwise, it might actually make you less money because it's going to take away money from you and give it to the others.
We're gonna go into like specific examples in a second, actually, and I think a lot of people are like skipping forward on 2x speed to kind of get there. But here is always the junction where people go, oh no, now we need to talk about cutting people and how terrible that is, and so forth. And I totally get it, and I totally understand that people don't like negative messages, but I think that's just, we had this episode about AI and remote work, and basically we're like, hey, both of these things are making us less productive and dumber. And some people reached out and were pretty upset, as I expected. And I think the same thing will happen now again. And that's okay. But here it goes. So how do I believe should we go about this? In simple examples. And once you start going down this train of thought, by the way, the examples can go crazier and crazier and more fantastic, right? And really it is, the beginning is, oh wow, I can basically kind of, what that person did previously here on the manufacturing assembly line, I can put a robot in there. That's kind of the first level thinking here, right? What people are then forgetting is the second and third level impacts of that thing, which is let's just say the whole factory completely runs on robots, and then you can shut off the lighting and walk away. Right? Kind of that is the first thing is easy, but seeing where this journey can end, that's usually that only starts once you start kind of going into this. So we're gonna stay on the simple examples here. Very simple examples. And for me, it basically kind of currently splits into two camps. One is replace, the other one is augment. Yeah, replace and augment. So what roles are very likely to be replaced fully? And I don't mean, we're going to make a superhuman role out of that, and then we have a bunch of robots around it. No, it's fully replaced. And I believe that is already happening for outbound SDRs, for inbound SDRs, and for support reps. Yeah, I'm sorry. And the only argument that even Raoul and I in a previous episode could come up with why there should still be outbound SDRs around is calling. But it's the only reason. It's the only reason why that person and you know what, I'm not a doomer or trying to be shitty about this, but really, really frankly and honestly, I cannot tell the difference between an outbound email that is maybe shitty, maybe not, from an AI or from an SDR. And whatever the SDR is writing comes from a sequence anyway that someone else wrote on the team. Like, it's, let's not pretend that there's some kind of magic that's always being added. Don't get me wrong. I think the top 3% of SDRs, they have that ad magic and they kind of do add that stuff. But the vast majority, just not the case, right? The one thing that SDRs should be doing like crazy in the outbound function is calling, by the way. And the funny thing is, if you talk with SDRs about what they don't want to do, it's calling, right? Right, like that's simply what it is. So tools already that are replacing these is obviously 11x. We talked about the Hassan piece. I think they're called Artisan, the other guys doing also kind of that stuff. And then out of Germany, Paloa doing the support stuff, basically, right? And there are a bunch of other tools that, help with that. And, I think you're working probably with 5 of them right now, roll with those companies that, help replacing this. But I think that is a very clear replace potential for me. Will this increase your growth? No, it will not. Which is also why the hey CRO, use AI to grow more has failed. It's not, it's not going to replace you, increase your growth. And you and I discussed this a little bit. One of my learnings is if you previously were simply cost constrained, you couldn't hire another SDR into the segment because the segment is too small or the ACV is too small or something like that. Deploying AI SDRs will probably give you more money, will probably kind of give you more pipeline. What happened in the vast majority of places is that you have 5,000 accounts that are being worked on by 10 SDRs or something like that. And they can work through those 5,000 accounts like in 4, 5, 6 months and then start over. That works out. If you on top of that put an SDR AI that works on the same accounts, like, yeah, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're not going to be able to generate more pipeline. You will have a spike in the beginning and then it flattens out for everyone, basically, right? Yeah. So the right approach here is not to add the AI SDR to the team, but to make the AI SDR the team and remove the SDRs from that equation. Very rough, and some people will be sitting there like, well, but in my example, it's maybe a little bit different, and I agree, it probably will be a little bit different. We're just talking about, generally speaking, vast majority. What I think this is the right approach.
I think the central argument here is that no matter how you do it, there's the risk of attention or the lead gen just kind of being a spike rather than an increase of the curve. And so the example that you gave me, just very pragmatic within a company that I've seen, is they're operating in 3 markets, language markets and regional markets. And they also have a bunch of beautiful leads in 50 other markets that they don't speak the language of. It's not worth hiring an SDR for these markets, but in each of those, whatever have you, right? In Ethiopia, in like Laos, in Mexico, or Mexico is probably too big, but whatever. In each of those countries, there's 10, 15 very interesting companies with a high likelihood of closing. Previously, they were never going to go and hire an SDR for each of these countries because language is kind of the thing, right? And now they had the idea of, okay, let's get an AI for that. It can kind of go into most of these languages, and we're golden. We're just going to collect the top 10 to 15 leads there. And that worked out really well for them. Like, let's say 4 to 6 months. They were mining great customers. The first one was actually Brazil. I don't know why they couldn't figure that out. Figured out Brazil within a month. Then they moved to, I think it was somewhere in Asia. I think it was Indonesia. Maybe it was the Philippines, which is an incredible market, by the way, 300 million people on there, but couldn't figure it out. I helped them do it. And now we're about 6 months after, and nothing's happening anymore. They're basically down to exactly where they were, which was they didn't fix any of their general problems. They didn't fix any of their efficiency losses. They didn't fix any of their wasteful use of resources, money, time of the SDRs, of the AI use. They basically just took a spike for about a couple months, let's say half a year, approached some of the most promising, and that was well-researched, accounts, and worked those through, got great money off of that, are down to exactly where they were. And funnily enough, the CRO is fearing for his life, because even though he delivered that great money, and that was a lot of his idea, right now it feels like he's losing, because where is all that revenue from? Why are we not growing? We were never growing in the first place. We were just taking a little bit off the top right now and making some quick buck.
And I think, you know what, is also, hey, don't complain about it. I mean, they got more money out of that, so, you know, kind of shut up, right? But I think that's the replace bucket, and there's some stories on the fringes where you know, some of this is potentially already working or working in different ways, and yada yada. I think then there's a much larger bucket, which I call the augment bucket. Yeah? And this is really AEs, solution engineers, CSMs, account managers, even managers, frontline first row managers, could be coaches as well. Like, think about all of that, right? So what do I say and think when I say augment? Well, it's wildly known anecdotally. I sometimes call it the calendar test. Pull up any random calendar of an AE and see how much white space there is, and you know how productive that person is, right? So that anecdotal wisdom has been now proven over and over again by folks doing surveys. So Salesforce I think they do a survey every 2 years around this topic, which is like, how much revenue generating activity are your reps doing in any given day? And the numbers between Gartner and Salesforce and all of those ancient big companies, we're talking 35%. Like, you know, of any given rep's day, that will be the amount that they spend on true revenue generating activities. And those are like having a customer conversation or prospect conversation, preparing that, you know, working on a proposal, working on a deck, stuff that really requires the top end of the brain of figuring this thing out, right? 70%, 60 to 70% of the rest of the day, they're spending on not these things. They are doing data entry. They are sitting in forecasting meetings where they just repeat what they've heard on the calls, just kind of hand that information further. Sure, they're also sitting, you know, having enablement sessions and one-on-ones with their bosses, and they have a lunch break. And, you know, these kind of things, sure. But really, if we're really honest about this, 35% is kind of low. 35% is kind of low, especially for some reps that you pay $250,000, sometimes OTE in the enterprise, you know, named accounts, strategic accounts, like $500,000, $1 million a year. 35% of productivity, I'm sorry, that's pretty bad, right? And when you take that as it is, and let's just do some back of the napkin math here, if you could double their productivity, in that regard, if you could take it from 35% to 70%, what is going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is the only way you're going to get there is by giving them more pipeline to work on in order to fill that time down, right? Because suddenly they have more time on their hands to have those customer conversations. What then will happen is you need to take that pipeline from someone that is, you know, sitting on the team potentially right now, and that team or that person will not have anything to work on, and you basically would be parting ways with that person, right? That line of thinking, we'll go into a couple of more examples here, but that line of thinking really is what I think is going to drive the reallocation of funds across the funnel. I think you will have parts of your organization in the funnel that will be replaced, and then you will have parts that will be heavily augmented to really support the two main things I think we as people and humans are, you know, really good at. We are great at building relationships. I don't believe this AI buys and sells from AI bullshit. I just don't believe it. At least not for, you know, couple of years. I don't know. And then the other piece is true mastery, right? Being really, really good at something. AI is not able to replace it, and it's probably going to take a while until it does. For whatever reason. I don't know what the reason is, but we're still pretty good at some areas and very specific areas. And we're, kind of average in all the rest. And I think and this is the term I'm coining sometimes now. I'm calling it zero waste GTM. If you really think about zero waste GTM, what you're basically doing is you're looking at your entire organization. You're thinking about who is building relationships, who is having mastery, and those people should only be doing that stuff. And everything around that should, for better or worse, be trying to automate it away. You should have AI taking care of all of that stuff. The easiest stuff to cut is everything data entry, and everything, updating systems, updating people. Like, hey, manager, let me sit down for an hour where you basically read out my Salesforce forecast, give you some additional flavor on all of those different deals so you can memorize that and then talk to your manager about the same thing, right? All of that is useless time. That shouldn't happen like that. And the list goes on. Like, okay, I'm a coach, I'm an enablement person, I want to help Raul get better at his job. So what do? I sit down and listen to some of the sales calls. Well, you're cherry picking, you're kind of looking around, you're not seeing the full picture. You're just trying to consume some information. AI can actually do that for you. AI can kind of sift out the things that are important, gives you the snippets you need to listen to, and then based on that, you can address your the coaching needs, right? So, rant over in a second. What will this lead to? What this will lead to is that you will have fewer folks in your go-to-market teams, but those folks will be, let's just say, the ones that previously were considered to be above average, part of the top 40, 30%, something like that. What is the second order effect now that will happen? And I think this is pretty key. These guys and ladies were in the top brackets because of three main reasons. They were converting at a higher pace, by having bigger win rates, higher conversion rates. They were showing better ACVs, like selling bigger deals, right? And on the CSM side, they were showing higher NRR numbers across the board. So what will happen now if instead of only a fraction of the deals and customers go to those high leverage reps, all of your customers and deals go to those high leverage reps? Well, suddenly you will basically not only pay less, maybe you pay them more because they're just elite now and they will kind of play that advantage. But at the same time, they will also produce higher quality results, lift your conversion rate, lift your ACV, lift your NRR. All of these things that we've been struggling for decades to figure out, that will just be a side effect of redistributing more pipeline, more customers to the higher leverage employees, and that being enabled by you saying, okay, these folks now have more time on their hands because we use a couple of tools to automate those things away, and now they can work more.
I was talking to some guy who I recently got to know. He basically is doing different work in the AI sphere. Very, very smart guy. Got to really be interested in his ideas. And he, over a pizza, basically said, hey, look, what do you think an AE or whatever equivalent is going to be earning in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, like maybe 400K, 500K. I don't remember what I said, to be honest. And he said, I think if you're a great AE, you'll be making 5 to 10 million a year. OTE. And I was like, come on, what the fuck? It's like, no, I actually think so. But those are only the great ones. And basically he's saying that's not even he thinks the efficiency gains can be 10, 20, 50x. That's not even a 10, 20, 50x improvement to where we are right now. So there's a lot of efficiency gain also still to the company and a lot of money left over for all kinds of people to feed and walk through that. And I don't know if that is true, but what I'm trying to get across here is there's people who think that this is going to go completely different from the reality that a lot of people have worked into right now, which was, let's just replace all the average people with average SDRs from AI work, and that's going to make us money. And that clearly seems to not be working too well. In fact, what seems to be, at least to some extent, there's first signs for this. What might be a direction going forward is idea is not to replace all the average people. The idea is to enable the top 5% of people. And it's kind of going to be a self-selective process where everybody else will drop out. And the gains are going to go more and more to the top. The good leads are going to go more and more to the top. And who knows, maybe we will have Cristiano Ronaldo sales type of people who will be making 5 to 10 million in your random SaaS company, because all of a sudden they're making 3, 5, 10x more than they're doing right now.
That is what this thing is going to enable us. And I think the CFO in this regard, we're calling it the CFO doing it, but I think it will just be CROs waking up, frankly. So what do they have to overcome? Well, there are some data challenges, there's some automation challenges, and those are clearly massive. Otherwise, you wouldn't be stuck at what you're doing right now. Like all these N8 end flows are really not actually solving the problem. I'm not just talking about it in a excited and convinced way. I actually am pretty excited and convinced about it. And to a degree and to a level where this is also where we're taking Attiv, right? Kind of the Attiv story is really going into enabling that shift. And it's really a core belief that has struck me now, working alongside all of that, seeing this unfold, seeing how these, 11 axes kind of fail, how that story didn't actually work out. I think they will be great and the company will be great and the category will be great, but the story didn't unfold like they would say, right? And I think what's going to happen now is there's going to be a shift in the other direction, and on that shift, I'm banking a bunch of chips myself, actually, right? Just to kind of underline, not like, oh, this is why you're saying this, Tony, but to underline how much I believe in this being true. Because I totally believe this is what's going to happen.
Not to make this any longer than it is already. I think this is just such an interesting area that also is at the same time highly relevant for you. So don't put this off as just like philosophy, or just like random ideas from these randos on the internet. These are things that within the next couple of years will influence your business very strongly on a financial, strategic CFO level, not just like on a which CRM do I use. I think it's good to think about them right now because everyone kind of gets it wrong. And unless you start thinking for yourself and maybe collecting ideas around it, chances are you're also going to get it wrong.
No, I think you said it raw, and we'll leave it at that for today. It's already been quite an episode, and see everyone next week. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Next week, I'm talking with Todd, CEO of Champify. We are talking about what we believe is overhyped and underrated in this extremely busy and super confusing revenue technology industry. If you don't want to miss it, hit subscribe and see you next week.
But I think what I'm seeing is a lot of pressure from boards and CEOs to inject AI into every part of their business. Most people probably feeling pretty inadequate in terms of their knowledge to how to do that. You read on LinkedIn and everyone's an expert building some crazy workflow that probably doesn't work, right? But it's impossible for these leaders, in my opinion, not to feel like, shit, does everyone else have this figured out and I don't? And I think these AI SDR, like the promise is incredible, right? Like you don't have to coach 24-year-olds and do tons of skill development and role play and babysitting, which is the reality to get that function to work really well. The premise sounds amazing. In practice, I have not talked to one company that says an AI SDR is making up a sizable chunk of my pipeline.